And when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, like we're just like a speck of dust on this thing. I mean, we're just like a blink. And that freaked me out.
Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this. Really enjoyed your book and excited to dig into all things discomfort or comfort, I guess, whatever side of the coin you decide to look at that.
Yeah.
But to start off, let's talk about the history a little bit here and get to where we are today with this comfort crisis, the title of your book. How did all this begin? And yeah, how far back does this go?
Oh man. I mean, you think about the evolution of humans, right? This happens over like 2.5 million years. Now, we evolved in really uncomfortable environments in so many different ways, right? It's either too cold or too hot. There was never enough food. We had to work for that food all day. So we, tried to be kind of lazy if we could, right? Things were silent. We experienced boredom all the time, on and on and on, right? And then around the Industrial Revolution, you start to get all this sort of technology infiltrates our lives, and our lives start to become a lot more comfortable in a lot of different ways, like across the board. So all of a sudden, we don't have to work for food, right? This means we also don't have to move as much because we start to move behind desks, right? So we lose this once uncomfortable thing of exercise. You can think of something like boredom, right? Boredom is this evolutionary discomfort that basically told us, hey, do something with your time. Go do something interesting. Now we have this really, really easy, comfortable escape in our cell phones, right? On and on and on. So our environments have really changed, and yet we still have this drive to always do that which is going to be most comfortable for us at any given moment, because this used to keep us alive. Now in a comfortable world, this backfires. So it's essentially, a mismatch between this environment we evolved in, these traits we evolved there, and this new kind of strange environment we live in, which is amazing. Don't get me wrong. Everything is great about modern life, but there are downsides that I think we haven't quite figured out how to manage yet.
Well, let's get into some of the nuances of why this is such a problem. We talked about now how we got here, but, we've evolved to this point with our technology and such, and life in a lot of ways has gotten easier. But how is that affecting us in a negative way?
Sure. I mean, so in the book, The Comfort Crisis, I look at a handful of what I guess I would consider evolutionary discomforts that we've essentially engineered out of our lives, and ones that I think we should try and think about putting back into our lives. So, for example, we don't spend that much time outside anymore. So we spend about 95% of our time indoors now. The reason that we do this is because the indoors is temperature controlled. It's comfortable. There's sofas indoors, right? It's also a lot more predictable. So the human brain does not like what it can't predict, right? So if I go outside, all of a sudden things become a lot more predictable than if I'm in my safe house, right? So we don't spend this time outdoors, and it turns out that time in the outdoors is really good for our mental health. Physical as well, because we're usually moving outdoors, but even just sitting outside has great mental health benefits. I mean, across the board, and this goes from it can increase productivity, increase creativity, and there's different doses that we need, and we can get into that. But think of something like I mentioned, boredom, to go over that, right? So as part of the book, I spent more than a month up in the Alaskan backcountry hunting. So I think the average person who's never hunted tends to think that it's like this, you're tromping through the woods all day and like chasing animals. Like, no, you do a lot of like sitting and waiting for animals to come through. So we were hunting caribou. So we're waiting for this herd to migrate from north on the tundra down south. So you're just sort of waiting for them to come through. We'd wait for like 4 or 5 days at a time and see nothing. So we're sitting on this hill for hours and hours and hours. Now my cell phone doesn't work up there, right? There's not a bar of reception to be had within 100 miles. And all of a sudden I find myself bored again. It's like, what's this? Because today I would normally just kill that boredom with my cell phone. The average person today is spending more than 11 hours a day engaged with digital media. We have all these really easy, effortless escapes. But as I sort of mentioned a second ago, boredom is this evolutionary discomfort that was once pretty beneficial to us because it would tell us whatever you were doing with your time, the return on your time invested has worn thin. So go do something else. Now, in our past, this could be like, let's say we were hunting like I was, right? Now, I'm doing it to mimic something that we used to do in the past because I get something out of that. But in the past, I would have really needed that food. Now, if the hunt is just not working out, boredom would have kicked in and basically been to alert me, hey, like the return on your time up here is not working out. You need to go do something else. So boredom just tells us go do something else. And in our past, when we didn't have these easy, effortless access to media, this really easy, fun thing to do all the time, we'd often do something more productive, more creative. We'd have downtime for our brains. Now we just sort of dive right into a cell phone or a screen. And so in the book, I argue, you hear so much stuff about like, you need to spend less time on your cell phone. You need to spend less time on your cell phone. But what happens is a lot of times people go, okay, they reduce their cell phone screen time by 2 hours and then pick up 2 hours on Netflix or behind a computer, right? It's like your brain doesn't know the difference. So I advocate we really need these times of to sort of become familiar with boredom again. Because what happens, and I definitely experienced this up there, it's like, I could only stare at nature for so long. Eventually my mind wanders into some interesting places. I wrote some of the book. I came up with things like Christmas lists for like 2 years in a row, right? I came up with a bunch of ideas. I'm a magazine writer as well. I came up with a bunch of story ideas, and they were all really good ideas. Like I always struggle with coming up with ideas at home, but having that like being forced into boredom and like not having the easiest escape when that thing gets hard, I think was really beneficial for me. And there's studies that back this up. They will take 2 groups of people. They'll let one group, do whatever, hang out in a room. They automatically pull out their cell phones. And then they'll have another group that they bore the heck out of them. And it turns out that the bored group always outperforms the non-bored group in creativity tasks. So there's definitely something to that, right? We just don't have it anymore. What else? Hunger.
Well, let me just jump in here for a sec.
Yeah.
Before we get to hunger, let's get into this Alaska trip a little bit and talk about some of the nuances there. Starting with the boredom piece, I'm curious, take us through what it was like over time as your body, you mentioned, coming up with different ideas and it sounds like overall it was a positive, different kind of experience for you. But take us through on a more granular level what that was like in the beginning and then over time.
So I'll answer that by telling you this. So the Arctic is dangerous, right? It's like crazy weather can come in. Basically what happens is I took 6 flights to get where we were, and then everything was by boot thereafter. So I took a 747 to Seattle, based out of Las Vegas. So then I took Seattle plane to Anchorage to this tiny town called Kotzebue, which is up in the Arctic Circle in Alaska. From there, I take this little 2-seater plane like 100 miles out into the tundra. Then an even smaller plane comes by where I'm like, we're packed in like a bobsled team, me and this pilot, to another location that's even farther. So we are like out in the middle of nowhere, right? It's dangerous. It's freezing cold. There's grizzly bears. The land is just super rough. Like there's no trails, anything like that. And so because of this, you would think that I would be super stressed out like the entire time. And I was at first, right? But there's this concept called the nature pyramid, which I talk about in the book. And it basically tells us how much nature we should get, how often, for different benefits. So you can think about this like the food pyramid, right? So the food pyramid is basically like, eat this much grains this often, eat this much meat this often. It's like that. So at the very bottom, the research has shown that 20 minutes 3 times a week is associated with all kinds of improvements in focus, decreases in stress. You go up the next rung, and it shows that, and that is, by the way, the type of nature that you can find just like in any park, like a city park, whatever. Up the next rung of the pyramid shows that 5 hours once a month in a little bit wilder, like kind of more country nature, like you'd find at a state park or something. That's associated with a lot less depression, less anxiety. And then at the very top, sort of the tip top, is this concept called the 3-day effect. And it basically shows that after 3 days in like backcountry nature, stuff that's, pretty wild, you might have to hike into, the human brain starts to ride what are called alpha waves. So in everyday life, we normally ride what are called beta waves. Now, these are like frenetic, go, go, go type waves, kind of associated with burnout. Now, alpha waves are the same type of waves found in experienced meditators. They're very calm, centered, focused. You just feel like, oh man, like you feel like a Zen monk or something, right? And I definitely experienced that out there. So the first day I get there, it's like I'm still kind of adapting, a little bit freaked out, like looking every which way for a grizzly bear. But after the third day, it's like sort of time and space sort of just dials back. It's like in modern life, like there is so much that we can constantly do and suggested we do, right? Like think of the pace of Twitter. Think of the pace of Instagram. Watch a movie from 1950 compared to one today. Everything is sped up. So you go out there and remove yourself from that, and you get a lot calmer. Like you start to notice things. Your thought patterns start to change. It starts to strip away sort of that removal from all the kind of craziness of today. It starts to strip away a lot of layers, and you start to like really see what matters to you and is important in everyday life. And so for me at that granular level, it was just sort of like a slowing down, and it's really satisfying. And so, like I said, you would think I would be super stressed out up there the whole time. It wasn't the case at all. Like, of course, I had moments of acute stress, spikes in stress, when I would see a grizzly bear or, when we were hunting, or we had this situation where we almost lost our tent one night because of like these hurricane force winds. But overall, I felt the best I'd ever felt in my life.
And for you, Michael, had you had a lot of experience either fishing or hunting before this?
No, so I grew up fishing, but I was not a hunter, not by any means. I'd been on a hunt with a friend before, but I'd never actually hunted myself.
And what was that like for you to wrap your head around the idea of, taking down and taking the life of a mammal? That's a big difference between fishing.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm trained as a journalist, and I decided I'm going to go on this hunt with these guys. One of the guys I went up there with, his name's Donnie Vincent, and he's like this backcountry bow hunter and filmmaker, sort of an explorer type, right? And so he invites me up there, and he says, "Yeah, you should hunt." And at first, I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And I told myself it's because I'm a journalist. I don't get involved, right? And then his response was, "I think you would understand like why we go up there and get more out of it if you were to hunt." So I decided to trust him on that, more or less. And, when I think about why did I have those reservations, it's because like humans don't want to face the idea of death, their own death. The fact that like for life to go on requires another thing to die. Meat is just sort of presented to us in like, these nice little foam trays. It doesn't really look like it came from something living, Like, can you imagine if they just hung a cow at the normal grocery store? And we're like, yeah, point to what muscle you want. No, it would never work, right?
There'd be a lot more vegetarians.
Yes, sir, there would. So that was my perspective on it, right? I think that had like influenced why I had those apprehensions. And before we left for like the middle of the tundra, I bought a hunting tag. So I'm invested in this, right? And we see a herd eventually. I mean, we got skunked a lot, but after like a couple weeks, we see a herd and there's going to be an opportunity for me to hunt. And essentially the herd we predicted they might come up over this saddle. And if we could get to the other side of the saddle, we might be in a good position. Okay. Even then, when we are going across the saddle, I'm like army crawling across the tundra. It's like frozen through like muck. And I got a gun and I got the rifle in my hand. Like I'm as invested as you can get. I'm 5,000 miles from home, whatever the distance, right? Even then I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to hunt. I don't know if I'm going to do this, right? And so we sort of move in and get in position, and over the apex of the saddle, like these antlers appear. It's the first thing we saw, right? And this herd of 30 is doing exactly as we predicted. They're coming down. And there's one that's older. We only wanted to hunt animals that were at least 8 years old, and you can gauge that by a variety of factors. But there's one that was like really old, probably 11, 12, and their lifespan pretty much maxes out at 12. And he was limping. So like I saw that and I was like, okay, this is the one, if I'm going to do this. And they're kind of coming closer, like we're kind of on their flank, and they don't see us. And this animal keeps like bobbing in and out of the herd. So I can't really get a good sight on him. And finally the guy that I'm with, like they were like 200 yards, meters, because you're in Canada, right? 200 yards, 175 yards, 150 yards was about the closest they were going to be. And then it was like, now they're going away from us. So 160, 170. And the guy I'm with just kind of looks at me and he goes, look, man, if you don't want to pull the trigger, you don't have to pull the trigger. But if you're going to pull the trigger, you got to do it soon, And right after he said that, it's like the herd parted kind of. And this, old caribou is just standing there. It's like perfect shot. It was just like I took a breath and I pulled the trigger. And then once you know that you've hit an animal, you don't hesitate. You keep shooting, because any extra time, if you've just happened to wound it, it's time that it might suffer. So I shot again and it went down. And right after that, I was like, what have you done? Like I was an emotional wreck, It's like I'd never killed anything before. And we went over to it and it was like lying on the tundra, and it, the only sign that it had once been alive, or that it wasn't just like sleeping, was there was like the tiniest trickle of blood in its mane. And I just was like, I was like, why did you do this? Like, this is terrible. Like, you just took this thing's life, and its herd is over on the hill now. And so I wasn't proud of myself at all. It was heavy. And then we started to break the animal down for meat. And in that process, like the guy I was with remembers me saying, oh, it's meat. And it's like, then I had this, it all of a sudden occurs to me, this is an uncomfortable realization, man. I eat meat every single day almost, but never once have I felt an ounce of emotion about like the chicken on my plate, the hamburger I get from Wendy's or wherever, right? Never once. And yet here I am, I'm like this complete emotional mess. And so what it made me realize, I think it really cemented the idea that like for one life form to go on, another has to die. More importantly for me, it made me realize that like there is a heavy emotional barrier that goes into eating meat. We're just lucky enough to live in a time and place where we don't have to think about that at all, And so you would think as someone starts to hunt, they would eat more meat. The opposite has 100% been true for me. I eat a lot less meat now, just because I'm more aware of like, do I need to eat this? Like I think that caribou out there, right? Do I need to eat this right now, or is there like something else I could eat? I'm not saying I've totally given up meat by any means, I think that meat is generally healthy for people. I don't think you have to eat it to be healthy, but I think that there's some clear benefits to it for human health. But I do think that we eat a ton of it without thinking about it, right? So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's great. And talk a little bit about, how long it's been since you went on that hunt and took down that caribou. And then do you feel like, since taking that animal's life, you still, the feeling you have about meat, do you feel like it's changing still? Or is it something that was kind of like in a moment and now you're different?
Yeah, so that was in the fall of 2019. So, a handful of months before the world changed, you know. In terms of meat, so caribous are about 400 pounds. You get about 150 pounds of meat from them. And I still have some of that meat in my freezer. Like it's on its last few pounds now. But and it's great. And it's definitely I definitely am continuing to eat less meat, that's for sure. Like I said, it's not like I don't eat it, but I don't need to have it for 2 meals a day like I used to. It could be 1 meal a day. And then maybe like a day or two a week, I like don't eat any meat.
Give us a better idea of what the weather conditions were like. We're probably all picturing what it's like out on the frozen tundra in the Arctic, but give us an idea of, in general, and then the day of that hunt when you took down that caribou.
Yeah, so it was I think sometimes you hear the word Arctic and tundra and you just picture a sheet of ice. It is that way in the winter, but we were there in the fall. So the landscape is really, I mean, it's beautiful. It's kind of haunting though. It's this mountain range that's super, super old. So all the mountains are really rolly and they've been filed off, over time. And the land is basically covered in tundra. And tundra is the worst thing that you could ever dream of to walk on. So I describe it as being like a mattress that is covered in partially inflated basketballs. So the mattress is just like the general land, and it's kind of like half frozen in parts, so you sink in. Sometimes it's muddy. Sometimes you'll even break through like to like underground running water. Super soft. Every time you step on it, you lose a ton of energy, right? Think of like trying to walk through sand. And then those partially inflated basketballs are what are called tundra tussocks, and they're just all over. And they are these balls of this type of grass that are about the size of a basketball. It's pretty densely wound, and you can step on them. They're a little firmer, but they're also like round and they kind of give. So in terms of walking, you're like, do I step on this mattress that's like I can't get any rebound off this ground? Or do I step on these ball shaped things that are going to roll my ankle eventually, right? So it's pretty unforgiving. In terms of the weather, we had maybe one or two good days that were like, I had 3 layers on and I didn't have my down jacket on. But mostly, and I think part of this is because I had come from Las Vegas where, the day I left, it was 110. It was freezing cold the entire time and super windy. Like the day that we hunted, it was so windy. Just like it was actually the soon after a night where we'd had like kind of an incident with the teepee and wind. But it's just super windy and unforgiving landscape. Like it's hard to really wrap your mind around how tough the ground is to walk on. Um, the distances and scale, because there's literally nothing up there. There's not humans for tens and tens of miles. And so, we would see like a herd on a hill or something, and I'd be like, all right, it looks like they're like maybe a mile away. And then we'd like measure it, and it would be like 3 miles. Like your eyes just can't figure it out. So it's a really amazing place, but definitely unforgiving.
Do you see yourself ever hunting again, or do you think this was a one-time experience that you can, check off the list and have as life experience?
Yeah, I think I will hunt again. for sure. I mean, it's not going to be, I think I'll do it um, as a way mainly for meat, as a way to, get outside, and also as kind of that reminder, like I talked about before, that, I think people are good at forgetting stuff. At least I am, for sure. This is a good reminder that, there's a heavy buy-in to our food system.
And talk about the psychological process of when you took that animal down, and if that impacted you thinking about your own life and your own mortality in a way.
Oh, for sure. So I have a whole section on this in the book. And, once I had this realization that, like, for one thing to live, another has to die, then the next logical step is, wait a minute, I am not excluded from that process, right? And although I laugh about it, that is a heavy realization to come to. And I think, as I talked about with how we aren't exposed to the idea of death in our food system, this is endemic, right? We, think about how funerals go. It's like someone dies, they go straight from the hospital to a mortician. They're made to look as alive as possible. We look at them in a viewing for a half an hour. Then they go on the ground. And then afterwards, we're told, take your mind off it. Stay busy. Don't think about it. Right? So, like, we really don't face the idea that, one day we're going to die. And it got me wondering, what are the repercussions of that? And so I started looking into, well, how do other cultures view death? There are places who do it differently. What are the effects of that? And I ended up traveling to Bhutan, which is this really small, it's a country that is about the size of South Carolina. And it's right near Nepal. And in Bhutan, death is like baked into the culture. So Bhutanese people are told to think of their own death at least once a day. Funerals are like this 21-day event where the body is just with people. People come visit it, like it's just around. After a person dies, they get cremated, and their ashes are mixed with clay and formed into these little pyramids. And these little pyramids are everywhere. When I say everywhere, I mean they are everywhere. Like road bends, you'll see like 100 of them. You'll be walking through one of their cities, and in the windowsills, they're everywhere. A lot of their art and dances and music focuses on death. And part of this, well, the main reason for this is because they're a mainly Buddhist nation, and the sort of brand of Buddhism that they practice has just played up this death angle. And so you would kind of think that, all right, if you're constantly reminded you're going to die, the way that we think about this, like, oh, I don't want to talk about death, I don't want to think about that. You would think that this would be like really morbid and just kind of bum people out, right? But it's the complete opposite. So despite the fact that they are one of the least developed nations on Earth, they also consistently rank among the happiest. They're always in the 20 happiest, sometimes in the top 10. They're happy. And they don't have all this stuff that we have, right? They don't have a ton of money. There's not a stoplight in the whole country. There's no Starbucks, there's no McDonald's. No one cares about, Rolexes and crazy cars and stuff, And so I kind of wanted to learn more about this, and like, how does this idea of being aware of one's own death contribute to this high level happiness that they experience? So I fly there. It's one of those places it's like, 4 flights to get there, like just tons of layovers, like 48 hours of traffic, or not traffic, travel. And so I go to meet this guy who is a higher up in the Buddhist faith there. I met it with a handful of people, but he was particularly interesting. So you have to have a driver in Bhutan, right? Like, it's by law. So me and this driver, we get in this dude's like smart car essentially, and we go up to see this guy. Now it turns out this guy lives in a shack that is at the foot of a monastery that is like on a mountain. So my driver like pulls off the main road, and like we got this dirt road that's like, all uphill, completely rutted out. It'd be like something that, even someone in the US with like a Jeep Wrangler would be like, yeah, I don't know about this one, And this guy's like, I got this. So he just like freaking Baja 500s this little car all the way up this mountain road for like 45 minutes. I thought I was going to have to buy him a new car by the time we were done, but we made it somehow. So then he drops me off, and there's a trail that leads to this guy's shack. And I get there, and I have to go through this like cleansing ritual because he's like really high up, in Buddhism. And then they sort of let me into this guy's house. And the first room, there's nothing in it. There's a single like meditation cushion on the floor. There's a cat on it. Next is a really sort of plain kitchen. There's like an electric cooktop. I don't even know if there was running water, to be honest. And then next room, there's this big like orange drape, silk drape, right? It's all right. What's behind door number 2, And I peel this thing back, and, instantly I get scent of incense hit my nose. And on the right side of the room, there's this kind of big altar with a big statue of the Buddha and burning incense and all this stuff. And there's like this window on the far wall. It's like letting in light, and the light is like catching the smoke. And then I kind of look to the left, and like behind this smoke, there's just this face, right? And it's this monk, and he's in full orange robes, like bald. He's sitting in the lotus position. And it was just like, and he just looked at me and he goes, welcome, and I was just like, oh my God, this is, if you could think of a cliche where the gangly Western dude is coming to see the guru, like this is it. This is 100% it. But I sit down and I talk to this guy, and it was just like so fascinating, especially like, he talked about how a lot of times in the West that we live life like it's sort of a checklist. Where it's like we go, okay, to be happy, I have to graduate high school. Then I'm going to go to college. Then I'm going to get a job. Then I'm going to get a car. Then I'm going to get married. Then I'm going to get a house. And then I'm going to have kids. And then I'm going to get a better job. Then I'm going to get a bigger house. Like it's all this stuff that we just check off as we go, right? And we always have in our mind that like once we check the next thing, that's when I'll settle. That's when things will be good. But it's the nature of our mind to just have that next check and have this short blast of like, oh, great. And like, oh, but the next thing, right? So we never really settle. We never can really just like be okay. And so he talked about how, in Bhutan, they don't worry as much about the checklist. And part of that is because they think about their own death, because he explained that when you start to think about your own death and like really take that into your mind, yes, it is very uncomfortable at times, like terrifying, but it changes your behavior, because all of a sudden you maybe realize what actually is going to matter to you in the end. So you start to ask questions like, okay, well, the next thing on the checklist is this car. Is that really going to solve this? Or like, would I be better served spending more time with family? I don't know, helping others, doing these things. So essentially what happens is by taking in your mind your own death, it changes your behavior in such a way that's positive. He talked about, picture that you are walking on a trail, and in 500 yards, the trail falls off into a cliff. Now, the catch is that the cliff is death. And all of us are on that trail right now walking towards that cliff. Don't you want to know that there's a cliff there? Most people don't. But if you know that there's a cliff there, all of a sudden you can, I'm going to look around. I'm going to take in the scenery. I'm going to have conversations with the people that I'm walking this trail with that maybe I wouldn't have had I not known we're going to go over this cliff, right? So by doing that, it tends to change people's behavior for the better. And there's actually research in the US that is backing this notion up. Like there's been some studies where they have people think about their own death, and afterwards they tend to report, yeah, it freaked me out at first, but for some reason I feel happier now. I'm doing stuff that makes me happier.
And you personally, before running into this guru and having this experience, were you somebody that thought about death at all, or was this a foreign concept to you?
So I had one thing that sort of made me think about this too is like I had this one incident in my life when I worked at Men's Health magazine for a lot of years. So I'm basically like, if you're just listening, you're not watching on YouTube, I'm basically just kind of like look like your average sort of bro, fitness bro, to be honest. And I'm working at Men's Health, and I'm commuting into work, fitness bro in this F-150, and I'm listening to a podcast, and the podcast starts talking about this concept called the cosmic calendar, which puts all of time in the universe. The universe is 13.8 billion years on a calendar to give you a sense of how things unfolded in time scale, right? It's all relative to time. So, on this calendar, the universe forms in, I think, like April or something. The Earth would have formed in, I think, September. And then December 25th, Christmas, is when the dinosaurs walked Earth. Humans came around on the 31st of December all the time, right? All the time that we have written down, everything we know has happened in history has occurred in the last like 3 seconds of this calendar, like 3 seconds before midnight. And when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, like we're just like a speck of dust on this thing. I mean, we're just like a blink. And that freaked me out because I'm like, oh my God, like this is going to end. And like, no one's going to remember me. Like we have all these stories we tell ourselves about whatever. And so I think it totally freaked me out, but I think it did change a lot of how my behavior. I mean, I can tell you like that day at work, someone sends me an email that normally would have annoyed me, just like, I'll get to it. There's no sense getting worked up about this, So I think I had a hint that there was something there.
How long ago was that you listened to that podcast?
That would have been probably 6 years ago, something like that. Yeah.
So you probably freaked a lot of people out just the way that you were freaked out back 6 years ago, in a good way. I mean, I think that's a great story to share and really puts a lot of perspective on things that we worry about, stress about, and make a big deal of when, life is short, and we're only here for a given period of time. And I think this whole conversation around death is just so important. And it's like taking the pencil and putting it in the pencil sharpener and just sharpening things up. And I think it's good to revisit on a regular basis. You mentioned once a day. I think it was the guru in Bhutan mentioned people there like to think about death. For you, do you have a practice now from returning from that trip where, you have certain either physical or different ways you can cue yourself to think about death on a regular basis?
Yeah, there was another guy I met with who was he went to Oxford and studied economics, and he's a Bhutanese guy, and now he runs this place that's called I'm going to forget what it's called, but it's basically like the Department of Happiness for the Bhutanese government. So they study this because they actively try to pursue happiness. So essentially what happened is in the 70s, where there's this big push to develop developing countries, the way that they typically measure development is by GDP. Now, GDP basically just says it's a financial metric. And the king kind of had this realization. He goes, so what's the point of having a big booming economy? Oh, so our citizens can be more happy. Well, why don't we just chase happiness rather than this thing that we think is going to lead to happiness? So that's what they did. So this guy now studies happiness, and he told me his recommendation was every night before you go to bed, and so that's what I do, and I think it definitely moves the dial. I mean, some nights it's like, all right, and then other nights it's like, whoa, like this was a good exercise for me,
That guru in Bhutan, did you ever find out what a day in his life looks like? I think you mentioned he was in lotus position. Was it meditating? Like what would a day in his life look like? Did you inquire at all?
That's a good question. I didn't ask. It's a lot of meditating. I think a lot of studying texts. He had books everywhere. He's written a book about death. I think it's called The Fine Art of Living and Manifesting a Peaceful Death is the name of the book. So he does writing. He was interesting too because, I talked about how he talked to me about how we tend to view death in the West. Well, he actually has a pretty good perspective on it because he actually lived in Atlanta for a handful of years while he was dating a girl who was the Dalai Lama's translator. So he's been in America. Like he sees how we run the show, and he's moved back to Bhutan. So he's got a good handle on it.
And when it comes to the history of how we handle the show here in North America, has it always been this way where we kind of, you mentioned before the story of we put somebody, we dress them up and we, put their best face forward after they die, put them in a coffin, bury them and try and forget about it. But has this always been the case?
No. So I think we used to be a lot more intimate with death. When someone died, like we would handle it at home, and there's a lot more of a process behind that. And I think also just even the sense of we tended to, I think like 80 some odd percent of the country was farmers up until 1900. So we are even more familiar with death from from where we're getting our food. It's like even my grandma talks about when she was a kid, if they wanted dinner, they'd send her out to kill a chicken, things like that. And then what happened is after Abraham Lincoln died, he was one of the first people to get embalmed ever. So it was this kind of new thing. They embalmed him for his funeral, and embalming took off. So you could have these funerals and, see people lifelike and then put them in the ground. This coincided with the rise of the modern hospital, where before people tended to die in the home. Now all of a sudden, death is off our hands. It's in the hands of experts. It happens in this hospital that is removed. And then when someone dies, it's like, okay, yeah, we'll get them to the mortician for you. And it's just completely off our hands. So now we're not put in these positions where we're more intimate with it, right? So I do think that funerals can be a good wake up for people still, but at the same time, it's definitely a lot less intimate than it used to be. And again, it's because it's a heavy thing to have to deal with. Of course we're going to try and hand it over to someone else if we don't have to deal with it anymore.
I wonder if we're in the middle of a shift where this is becoming more, less awkward and more of a conversation and people are starting to embrace it over here in the West.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like there, my book obviously talks about it at length, and a lot of, there's this stoicism has become really popular lately, and they talk about it a bit in that. There's also, I think there's a place called, I'm going to forget, it's like San Francisco Zen Hospice or something. And they're kind of thinking about it differently as well. So I think you're seeing these sort of like bubbles percolating to the surface, and people are starting to ask questions, but I don't think it's definitely not mainstream yet.
And Michael, in your case, you shared the story of going to Alaska, really getting immersed in discomfort for a long period of time. But for the average person who's, working, say, an office job, and earlier we talked about, getting in nature because we're in front of our desks and indoors, and that's a problem. What are some ways if people, can't pack everything up and go into the wilderness, like how can people embrace this in their day-to-day life, in their current lifestyle?
That's a great question. So, one form of discomfort that I argue that we've lost is that humans no longer take on essentially rites of passage. So as we evolved, we would, especially with young people, a person would be at point A in their life, right? Now we needed them to be at point B so they could really contribute to the tribe, so they could take on a family, so they could be a warrior, so they could just be a better contributor, right? So what we would do is we'd send them on a rite of passage. Now these all tended to have the same general framework in that the person leaves their environment of comfort and they go into one of discomfort, out into the to the wilderness for a while, often to do some sort of task. So, for example, the Aborigines had walkabout, where they just walk around the outback for a long time. The Maasai had a lion hunt that they would send warriors on. Different Native American tribes had similar things that happened outdoors. And these exist throughout time and space. And when that person would get back, they were a new person because along the way, they'd really struggled. They'd learned something about themselves. They'd been put in positions where they might fail, but they'd persisted, and they'd really sort of gained this competence and confidence to be this person B that was like a producer. Like, this is a person that we can count on, who's got something on board that you can count on, right? Now, we don't do these anymore, really. And I meet this guy whose name is Marcus Elliott, and he's a really fascinating dude. First thing to know about him is that he's a little bit far out. He's like been going to Burning Man since day one. He got himself through college by counting cards. But the second thing you need to know about him is that he's exceedingly brilliant. So he went to Harvard Medical School, decided he didn't want to be a doctor, decided he wanted to revolutionize sports science, which is, a grand statement to make. But he ended up doing it. So he has introduced essentially like big data and numbers and figures to athlete movement. And so now he has contracts with the NBA, does all this stuff with MLB, NFL, and he's essentially, he can quantify someone's injury risk and figure out, well, you're really uniquely good at, this specific movement or something, and that's going to give you an edge if you change your game this way. So like all the big names in sports have gone through his facilities. But he also realizes that not everything that improves humans can always be measured, right? There's like, if you think about the athletes he's working with, there's certain people where at the end of the game, you're like, just give this person the ball, right? They've got like some gear. There's something going on up there. So to try and get to that, he does this thing called misogi, and it's essentially trying to mimic these rites of passage that we used to have in the past. And the idea is basically like one day a year, go out and do something that's really challenging for you. Now, the for you part is important. It's not like you're doing some random thing that everyone else is doing. It has to be custom for you. And he basically uses as a guideline, what is going to be really hard is something that you have a true 50-50 shot of finishing. So, for example, if you had, let's say the longest you'd run is 10 miles, and you ask yourself, well, could I run 10 miles again? It's like, well, yeah. Well, could you run 15? And then you're like, probably. What about 18? And if you're genuinely like, oh my God, I don't know. Maybe not. Right? That's probably your misogi. So just go out and do that thing. It doesn't have to be running. It could be swimming. It could be hiking to a certain mountain that you've just driven by on your commute every single day and are like, I don't know if I could hike that in a day. But essentially what happens when you're out there is you're going to hit this sort of barrier where you're like, I can't keep going, right? I'm going to have to quit. Like, I've had enough. But by continuing to go, just one foot in front of another, whatever it is, you can look back and be like, well, wait a minute. I thought my edge was there and I'm past it. And like, what else in my life have I been selling myself short on? Because as humans, we're always going to sell ourselves short. And I think this gave us an advantage as we evolved, right? Like, why would you want to really think that you're a superhero if you weren't? We would have died off, right? You want people who are like, no, I'm going to avoid that risk. I don't think I could do that. But if they got thrust into that naturally, which our environment used to do to us all the time, we would be able to make it out alive, right? So we have an undersized appreciation of our ability, but we have oversized capability, I think. So he's trying to get to that. And so to bring it back to the average person, again, it's like, what's going to be truly challenging for you? I had a woman who was 70 years old read the book and go, I'm planning my next misogi. I can tell you she's not going to run 50 miles probably, right? Could be like she's just going on a 6-mile hike. But for her, it's 50-50, right? And she's going to learn something about herself. Could be, but you could also have someone who's a complete freak and is like, well, I did an ultramarathon. I'm going to run 200 miles. Or for that person, something truly challenging could be just totally out of the box because they're already comfortable with running, right? It could be like, well, now I'm going to swim like 2 miles, which for a real swimmer is like, whatever. But for that person, it's like, oh, let's see if I can do this, So we just, in general, I just don't think we face really challenging things where we might have a real degree of failure. And by not ever failing, more or less, I mean, you even think about how someone trains for a marathon. No one goes, I'm not sure if I can finish the marathon. They go, I'm not sure if I can finish the marathon in 4 hours or 3 hours, right? They know they're going to finish. But by not ever failing, we have an outsized fear of failure. So now, and like in modern life too, failure isn't that bad. Like, what's the worst that can happen in modern life if you fail? Like, what do we do that where failure is going to really be dangerous? It's not. But in our past, it used to be, and we used to learn from that. So I think mimicking that in a safe way can be really beneficial for people. And along the way, you're probably going to hit a lot of the discomforts that I talk about in the book. Like, for example, you might be hungry because if you're out for a long time, right, you're going to be in nature probably. That's a key. You might have moments of boredom. If you're doing like a pretty long run, you're just going to sit inside your head, So it's a good way to sort of introduce some of these concepts, I think.
And since your Arctic hunt, have you done any misogis, or do you have a list of ones that you want to accomplish in the next number of years?
Yeah, I have done. So I try and do one every year now. So I did one in 2020, and I will do one this year.
Can you share with us what that is?
Yeah. So one of the guidelines of misogis is that you don't like post about it on social media and do all that kind of stuff because you're doing it for you. A lot of times in today's world, people do stuff just so they can blast it on Instagram, like, oh, look at how cool I am. But for the purposes of education, I hadn't run more than 16 miles ever in my life. And so I went through sort of the steps that I went through earlier and was just like, okay, well, what about double that? And I thought, well, yeah, I think I could do double that. What about triple? Triple was like, I don't know if I can do triple that. So yeah, I went out to the desert Red Rock Canyon in Las Vegas and tried to run 48 miles. And I was able to, and I definitely hit that wall. I did a trail that was a 12-mile loop that went up into the mountains and then sort of back down. On that third loop, I was like, I'm done after this. Like, I'm going to quit. And I sort of got back to the start, had some water, and was just like, I don't know why, but I'm like, started another lap. And it was like at a certain point, it was just like, all right, we're going now, And like in that moment, we don't have those moments where it's just like, oh, this is awesome. Like, how the hell is this happening? I mean, it's a huge like boost and experience we just don't get anymore.
And how do you feel after you accomplish that? How are you changed?
Well, I think it puts in perspective a lot of the stuff we face in modern life. It's just, not really hard if you're generally well off person who listens to podcasts a lot. Yeah, I think it helps put things in perspective. I think it also helps you realize that you're capable of a lot more than you thought you were. And that doesn't just extend to like doing things outdoors. Probably a lot of the confidence that you get, you can bring into the workplace or into a relationship, wherever you want to bring it. I think that there's a reason people have been doing things like this for literally millions of years. It does something for us. Again, it's not one of the, people will try and overanalyze it. And it's like, look, you can't measure everything. But I know what this thing did for me. I know that people have been doing it for forever. You think we all just did this for no reason? So, yeah, it's hard to put a finger on though.
Did you do the run by yourself? And would you say an important aspect of doing a misogi, you talked about how it's not something you post on Instagram and share with the world, but is it something you need to endure, solo?
I don't think you have to do it solo. So the Marcus guy that I talked about, he does it with people. I think the trick is that you have to be well matched with the person that you do it with. So, it wouldn't make sense if I did the 48-mile run with someone who's a ultra marathoner already, because it wouldn't be that challenging for them, right? So I think finding someone that you're a good physical match with, you can totally do it.
You quickly touched on one of the discomforts that somebody might experience going through misogi would be hunger. And you extensively talk about fasting in the book. And I think for a lot of people, this is a great way, either, on a daily basis or a regular part of the routine, to bring that into their experience. And, we're so used to, in modern society, always snacking and eating constantly through our wake window. So I think this, for a lot of people, could be a great way to experience some discomfort. And it could be a good starting place for somebody.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was up in Alaska, we brought in about 2,000 calories a day in like freeze dried food. But we were burning way more than that because we're hiking with heavy loads all day. So I started to get hungry. And I don't mean like I'm watching the Food Network and Guy Fieri has a mound of nachos that takes up an entire tray. And now I kind of have a tinge of hunger. I mean, I'm like deeply, deeply hungry. And this wasn't something that I really experienced, right? It's like I think that the average person in the developed world probably isn't hungry all that often, like physiologically hungry. You look at the research, and like 80% of the time we eat, it's not for physiological hunger. It's because it's like breakfast time or lunchtime. It's because a clock tells us so. It's because I'll just eat. What else am I going to do right now? Right? Or we're stressed out. I think stress eating is one of the main drivers of the obesity epidemic that we have right now. It's just like there's these random stressors in modern life, and it's really easy to get a quick fix from those by just going in the pantry because there's so much food. It's so calorie dense. But we also know that, like, you look at all the different diets out there, and when they look at, they compare like the types of foods they have and all this stuff, like it really depends on how much you're eating. If you're going to lose weight, like you have to just eat fewer calories than you're burning. Most of the research says. And by doing that, you're going to experience hunger. So what is the rate limiting step of losing weight here? It's not like that sugar is toxic and it's going to kill you if you look at a Butterfinger. It's not that, fat is in your food and that's what's the heart of your problem. It's not that, like, you look at every diet, it's like something's evil. Something's evil in here, right? It's not that the one thing is evil. It's just that when we start to lose weight, our body kicks up our hunger signals, and all of a sudden it becomes hard. We can't persist against that discomfort. So I think by reintroducing hunger into your life, that can move the dial for you. And even if you're someone who doesn't really need to lose weight, I think that there probably might be some benefits to fasting sometime. I think a lot of times it gets positioned as like this miracle thing where it's like, oh, you won't get cancer if you fast. It's like, give me a break, right? But I do think if you look at how humans evolved, we did evolve in a context where there were times where we didn't have food, right? Ton of food. We would go through periods of hunger. We would go through times where we were removed from food. And I think it makes logical sense that our body would burn through a lot of stuff that maybe it needed to get rid of during those times. So again, it's like not this miracle worker, but I do think it has benefits. And so really kind of one of the main messages of the book that I want to drive home is like, we so often look for miracle cures in modern life because, well, that's a lot easier. If I can just focus on this one little thing and that's going to fix all my problems, then I don't have to look at these 10 other ways that I'm behaving, right? But really, like, our environments have changed so significantly over the last 100 years that it's all these little things that have crept in that we're just not even aware of. And so we need to make these like small little changes over time that adds up to like a better perspective, I think, and better outcomes.
As you're talking about these misogis, and we can use your Alaska example as our example here, it's interesting to think of, say, the hunger you felt on that trip or how cold you got on that trip as pushing yourself to a new extreme that you hadn't been to before. And then you come back into your comfort zone back in Vegas, and now it's like the bar has been set differently. You've expanded that zone of comfort in a way.
Yes.
So I can see that as being a positive aspect of this. Like, you're not regularly going to be as hungry as you were in Alaska or as cold, but you've experienced that now in a way that you hadn't before. And now you have that with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that's across the board. That's hunger. That's what doing physically hard things is. I mean, exercise, right? Like, I had to carry 100 some odd pounds of caribou uphill across the tundra. Like, whatever I'm going to do at this Planet Fitness is not even going to come close to that, right? So all of a sudden, my fitness can expand because my mind realizes where I can take my body, right? Even things like cold. It's like, cold's not that bad, you know? All these different things across the board. And so it's just like that expansion, as you know, as you put it, great. You're expanding your comfort zone in a lot of different domains, and that makes your life better. And, you know, I think one thing for me too, coming back, is that I had this like newfound gratitude and could really see how amazing modern life is. You know, it's like to get up to Alaska and my first flight, it's like I get on that plane and it's like flying is awful. Flying is the worst thing that could happen to a human, right? I'm in fifth class. It's like so tight in the seat, you know, the seats are cramped. It's too hot. The movies suck. The coffee sucks. The bathroom's super small. It's like all these complaints and problems. And then I go spend a month in Alaska, and it's like I'm freezing the whole time. There's never enough food. There's no coffee. Anytime I want to do anything, like if I want to go to the bathroom, I have to like hike out onto the tundra with the rifle in case a grizzly bear comes along, you know? So when I take that flight home from Alaska back to Vegas and I get on that plane, it's like, oh my God, this is great. This is heaven, right? Because it's warm. I hadn't sat in a soft chair for a month. I had entertainment on the screen in front of me. It's like all of a sudden those really terrible movies aren't so terrible when you haven't seen a screen anymore. Pretzels, hot coffee. There's running water coming out of the bathroom at 30,000 feet. Like I hadn't had hot running water in a month. And so it really, like, by removing myself from all that stuff, I could really see coming back into it, like how amazing it is. All this stuff that we take for granted is unbelievable. So that just makes me a lot more grateful for everything. I can put a lot of stuff in perspective, right? And I have a different outlook on life that enhances my gratitude across the board. And when you're grateful, I think just everything in your day is much better.
Do you think that gratitude has stuck with you in a major way over the years? You talked about this being back in 2019. It's been a couple years now. Do you feel that kind of wax and wanes over time, and it's kind of, you know, taken a downturn a little bit over the years?
Look, the first time hot water hit my hands getting out of the tundra, it was like I'm like a 2-year-old on Christmas, right? Like the smile on my face was ridiculous, and it stayed there for 20 minutes. Do I get that excited over hot running water now? Of course not, right? I have maintained elements of it, but I think it's most acute after. That's why I think it's important to go do these type of things that remove you from that, whether it's like a quick misogi, whether it's like a camping trip, whatever, just kind of getting out of it for a while so you can come back and appreciate things, you know, go through that discomfort. So that when you get back to your world of comfort, you're like, this is awesome. I don't know what I was complaining for. I think it definitely helped me through the pandemic for sure. I think that pandemic was tough for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And I think that if you got sick, if you lost a loved one, if you lost a job, that was really traumatic. But I also heard a lot of friends who were like in their nice houses behind screens with access to Netflix and all kinds of food, and they didn't have to go work at a hospital, blah, blah, blah. Tell me about how terrible it was. Like, dude, you basically have had like a day off for a year. Like, was it really that bad? Even 100 years ago, when there was another pandemic, it was like, well, go get on the factory line, Like, and by the way, there wasn't OSHA. Like, you're working in a factory for 12 hours a day. It doesn't matter that there's a pandemic. Like, in the grand scheme of time and space, I think for a lot of people, the pandemic was like, could have been a lot worse, right? So I think it helped give me that perspective. Like, yeah, were there downsides? Of course, but it could have been a lot worse. And I think it also made me appreciate the people who had to go work at the grocery store, who were nurses and were out on the front lines helping people. I'm like, those people are badass. I cannot complain about a single thing in here. Like, oh no, I couldn't go to a concert. Oh no. It just kind of helped give me some perspective.
I want to talk more about coming back from that 30-day trip. You fly back into Vegas. I'm sure within, a short period of time, you came into contact with family and friends. This was before the pandemic. How did they, notice, or did they notice, I should say, a difference in you after being away and having, going through so much discomfort?
Yeah, so I asked my wife this. I was like, "Do you think I've changed at all?" And she said, "You're a lot calmer, and stuff just doesn't frustrate you anymore." And I think that's true because I think it just gave me some perspective. Soon after getting back from Alaska is when I went to Bhutan, and so kind of thinking about death, it's just like a lot of, at least for me, what used to stress me out or ruffle my feathers was stuff that really doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of my life. And I think I had a better ability to see that.
Let's talk more about when you took down the caribou. How many days into the trip was that?
We were a while. We were at least 10 days or so.
So you had built up some hunger. You were hungry at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about. I want to know more about we didn't talk too much about the experience of after the kill when you guys were breaking down the animal, and talk about carrying that back to camp. And I want to hear about that first meal after it had been 10 days and you're fueling yourself on these dinners that were, you talk about pouring boiling water over a plastic bag of food and eating these energy bars. So talk about how delicious and satisfying that caribou was.
Yeah. So, you know, we killed the caribou maybe 5-ish miles from camp. But also we'd gone like downhill the whole time. So we had to pack our bags with it and hike it back to camp. And our backpacks are probably like 100 pounds. And the pack out was, my background is I worked at Men's Health for a lot of years. And I was the guy they would send in to do sort of on the ground stories. So I'd get thrown into a lot of like really extreme kind of crazy gyms or to go train with athletes or do all this kind of stuff. So I'd like been forced into do some hard physical things in my life just through work, but this was by far like the hardest thing ever because the ground is so terrible to walk on. The weight is so heavy and you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And unlike a workout in the gym where I can go, you know what? This sucks. I'm going to go home. I can't do that, right? Like I have to keep going. There's no like, let me tap out real quick. So it was super hard. And then we get back though, and all of a sudden we have meat now, like fresh, free range to the extreme, organic, all the Whole Foods upsells this meat has, right? And cooking it and eating it was like honestly the best meal of my life. Someone recently asked me, "What's the best meal you had in your life?" And we were down at this like nice restaurant on the strip or whatever. Like, oh yeah, I was in this like shitty tent up in the Arctic, and it was though because I think hunger is the best sauce. It's like you don't appreciate food as much if you've already had plenty to eat, and I think having to work for it and having that base of hunger just made it like amazing.
You share this story in the book when you're switching between airplanes, going up to the last stop in Alaska where you're going to do this hunt, and I think it might have been before you got on the last plane because they kept getting smaller and smaller. You couldn't get on the flight with the other two guys, and you were left behind for the plane to come back and come get you. and you had time all by yourself.
Yeah.
And I think this was really interesting for me to read. And I can't think of the last time I've been, well, I probably never, I'm sure I never have been that disconnected from people, from society. Talk about what that was like when you realize like there is not another human being for who knows how many miles, and what that was like just being in the elements of nature.
Yeah. So to get out there, we had to take successively smaller planes. And at one point, there was two of us, and the plane came and it picked up one of us. It can only fit the pilot and one other guy. So I'm left alone, like out in the middle of the tundra, like miles and miles from anyone. And of course, there's like big clods of grizzly bear poop on the tundra and all that. And just like, well, see you later. I'll be back in a while. And it occurred to me, like, I had never been that alone. Even I think in modern life, when we're like, I need some alone time. Like, what do? We go into our room, maybe. And oftentimes when we're alone, we're still with people in the form of, say, text messages or social media, or we're reading a book, which really is like a form of, almost like being with the writer, kind of. Or we are watching TV or whatever. So we're always kind of with someone somehow. But this was like totally alone, you know? And I had never been that alone in my life. And it kind of got me thinking about, it just got me thinking about that. And when you look at a lot of the research, it seems that Americans are a lot lonelier, and people in the West are just generally lonelier than we have been in a long time. And there's definitely some detriments to that, for sure. We need a good social support network. But at the same time, what doesn't get talked about, and what I talk about in the book, is there's also a lot of benefits to solitude. Now, there's a big difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is like, I want to be with people, but I can't for whatever reason. Solitude is like, I need some time to be with myself. I'm going to use that for benefits. So, there's people throughout history who have used solitude to think better, to learn something about themselves, to get a handle on whatever their existence, to think, right? I mean, you think of like the Buddha left the palace gates and went and wandered. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert alone. People like Abraham Lincoln, he needed these times of extended solitude to write well. Even modern day people like Steve Jobs would take a lot of time to just like, okay, I need some time to be alone. And I think that is discouraged now. So a lot of humans generally, we feel uncomfortable when we're alone. They've done polls on people, and it's like one of the greatest studies of all time. It's just fantastic. These researchers were basically like, okay, you can either, I'm trying to remember both scenarios, but basically they were like, okay, either I'll stand here with you, we can just hang out, or, but you have to hit yourself with a jolt of electricity, or I'm going to leave you, but you don't have to electrocute yourself. And people were like, yeah, just hang around and just electrocuted themselves, like that's how much we dislike being alone with ourselves. Because I think when you are alone with yourself, when you take away all the stimulation and having to worry about other people, you sort of start to really get to know yourself. I think a lot of times, like I found for myself, it occurred to me when I was up there, like a lot of our lives we live is just a reaction to others. We're constantly jockeying and shaping our personality based on what other people respond to, right? We're never just with ourselves and with our thoughts, and therefore we don't really get to know ourselves that well. And so I think that taking time to be completely in solitude, oftentimes bored, without other people in these different forms of media with us, can be really beneficial. Because this one researcher I talked to, he's like, look, obviously it's great to be with other people. Like, we know that loneliness isn't good, but at the same time, if your social network ever falls away and you haven't practiced solitude and you're not okay with being with yourself, you're going to find yourself in quite a pickle, right? You could argue that someone who has the ability to be in solitude and can use that for good, they probably don't get lonely when they get thrust into a situation where there's not a big support network around them. So I think that's something that people need to think about for sure. And yeah, it's uncomfortable at first.
Do you create a formal practice so you fit that in on a regular basis, taking time for solitude? Like, will you block off, 20 minutes in the calendar? Because we all know how busy modern life is. And I could see how if you didn't do that, it could easily get away from you.
I do a couple things. Every morning I'm up really early and I just kind of work alone in silence for a few hours. No, no email or whatever, that kind of stuff. No music and phones and blah, blah, blah. But also I do a lot of running alone out in the desert. And it's just a good way to we're all like ruck out there, it's just a good way to be alone. I don't take tech. I bring my phone, but I shut it off. It's just a good time to process thoughts and just not have outside influence.
And when you do that, do you find subjectively you're more creative and you think better?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the best ideas I get are out there because I think that we need extended time to let ideas percolate, right? And in today's world, that gets interrupted all the time. It's like an email comes in, a cell phone rings, even a loved one. It's great. They'll come in, but they're still interrupting that. So we don't have that. It's almost like you think of starting, if you want to make a really good cup of coffee and you turn your coffee maker on, but then every 30 seconds you shut it off and then you kick it back on, your coffee's not going to be good, right? It needs that time for it to happen all at once. So that's kind of how I think of it.
Do you have a formal meditation practice?
Yeah, I usually meditate 20 minutes a day.
Is that part of that morning routine by yourself?
It is, yeah. It's that kind of the tail end of it.
Did you notice changes in your behavior around social media, Netflix, things like that, coming back from Alaska and not having that and realizing the benefits and breaking that cycle because you had a forced, which a lot of us don't have that benefit of being forced away from the devices to break that habit. So did you notice coming back, it was easier for you to, form new habits around all that technology?
Yeah, I think it was. And I think it also made me more appreciative of it too. It's I think everyone has this love-hate relationship with their phone, but it's mostly hate, right? Everyone's like, oh, this damn phone. I hate the thing, but I can't stop. I can't stop. Whereas when I came back, I'm like, man, this thing is really amazing. And I can totally understand why we're all totally addicted to it. But I could also get a little bit of space from it. What's been interesting is that since the book has come out, people have been sort of more interested in my work and trying to balance that because that requires a lot of screen time today. No one writes a letter to say, I liked your book. It's here's an email or here's a message on Instagram, which is awesome and I love. But it's also okay, well, now I need to figure out, at first I was just kind of taking things as they came in, but now it's oh, if I just block out time, respond to this stuff, respond to questions all at once, then I can make sure I get this time where I can do all this other stuff. I think the problem really isn't so much that we spend, let's say, 2 hours a day on our phone or whatever it is. It's more than that, let's be honest. But it's that the 2 hours occurs in increments of 1 minute every 5 minutes, just fracturing our attention over time, more and more and more, right? It's taking away our boredom. Whereas if we were to be look, I'm going to do my 2 hours, but I'm just going to do it I'm taking my 2 hours right now. It'll probably end up being less if you did it that way too, That way it's not that constant fracturing because that seems to be not work very well for our brains.
Distracting. Yeah, that makes sense. And when it comes to getting up and doing that writing, are you working on the next book already?
I am, yep.
Is it going to involve any journalism out in the field experiments? Anything radical that you can talk about?
Yeah, it will. I will say I just got back from the crazy deep in the jungles of Bolivia for a couple weeks. So that'll be a part of it. And I got a bunch more travels coming up around that.
Awesome. Look forward to it. Hopefully, we can have another conversation like this when the new book comes out. Other than people getting a copy of The Comfort Crisis, how can they connect with you after the show, Michael?
Yeah, I'm at eastermichael.com is my website. And I don't use social media really except for Instagram. I try and keep it to just one thing. So I'm at Michael_Easter on Instagram.
Awesome. We'll link it up in the show notes. Any final thoughts, any challenges for people, how they can go and face some discomfort, easy wins?
I don't think so. I think I laid it all out. The book gets a lot more in depth into little things you can weave in. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out or whatever.
Perfect.
So I
Thank you,
appreciate you
Michael.
having me on, man. It was a super fun conversation.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yep.
We'll
Thank you.
do it again sometime.